Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. Every month I make my own scrapbooking kit based off of inspiration, and then once a month I make my own products based off of that same inspiration. I will link you up to my kit build if you don't know about that. This month I'm splitting up my makes into 3 separate parts because that does help YouTube reach viewers who are looking for very specific things. And if you want to catch all 3 parts, I will link you up to all of those below. Let's start with part 1, where I'm going to make some wooden looking frames based on this 49 and Market embellishment package, and you can see the frames there on the screen. I am starting off this wood frame project with a pile of scraps of white cardstock. You can use any paper you want here, from various pattern papers to plain white to, as I'm going to do here, I'm going to zhuzh them up a little bit with some ink to make them look more like wood grain, because that's the style I like, and I will give you more tips along the way on how to make it look more like real wood than plain white paper. All right, I have got a scratch sheet here because this will be inky and a little bit gluey later on in the process. And here is the technique that makes it look like wood grain, and that is dragging an ink pad just kind of on the edge of the ink pad. You drag it along the length of the paper, and that starts creating these striations and streaks that look like the grain of wood. And even if you take a pause with that ink pad, it'll make a thicker line. You can see that up there at the top of this second piece, and that looks like kind of the split between wood planks. So you can do this with any color ink pad you have. I like this particular color, and I will pop that color up on the screen because it's eluding me right now. I'm also going to use that black ink pad, which is low on ink, so it will actually look a little more gray later on for some more of these. Now, there is a little bit of math to do with this. I'm going to start my first frame to fit a 4x6 photo. You can make these any size you want, but know what your kind of in use is when you start them. So to frame out a 4x6 photo, I like 1-inch strips. So in order to get these frames to overlap in the corners, you have to take that 1-inch thickness into account. So instead of cutting a 4-inch length, I actually need to cut 4 + 1 + 1 so that it overlaps on both sides of the photo. And so I've got a 6-inch strip on the bottom, and I will have 6 + 1 + 1, which is 8 on each side. Now, I say 8 and I say 6, but really I'm cutting these ever so slightly smaller, like 1/4 of an inch smaller, so that the frame will actually overlap the edge of the photo, and that I can glue this frame to the photo in place. Now here's what I like to do to miter my corners to make it look more like a wooden frame. I will line up the bottom edge and the side edge of these and make sure they're nice and flush. I do use a little bit of adhesive, a temporary adhesive, to tack them together, and then I will cut them from corner to corner so that I get that 45-degree angle, and no math involved there. It's just using the shape of the paper to work it out. Now, I do like to number my corners as I'm working because I start putting things down and setting things aside, and then I lose track of which corner was cut to match up with which corner. And if your cut is slightly wobbly, that will exactly match the wobble on the other piece, which is why I like to stack them on top of each other and then cut them. Now, I am saving these little triangular pieces that come off from these cuts because I'm going to use those to attach and adhere the frames together at the end of this project, so I will save those. Now, I was putting a lot of my adhesive on the front side of the frames. I would recommend doing it on the back because I did have to go and clean up a bunch of adhesive in the end, but because it was temporary, it wasn't too bad. But if you put it on the back, that'll save you some time. Now, I did ink the edges of those frames to give them a more realistic look, and once I get this one corner put together, you'll see that a little bit better. So with those triangle pieces, I am just using the same adhesive to line them up in the edges of that inside corner on the back side. So you can see how sturdy that is, and with that inking, it gives a shadow to that corner and really makes it look more like a wooden frame. Now you can see here my measurements weren't perfect, and this part of the frame is kind of bowing a little bit as I try to adhere it together. And this is where that temporary adhesive comes in a little bit handy, because you can kind of undo the other corners, give them a little bit more wiggle room as you put them together, and then try and get things to lie down flat. These will be pretty good. They will line up pretty well. They may not be exactly perfect depending on how precise your trimmer is, how detailed you are with precision of your cutting. But here I'm showing you with just this clear photo replacement mat that it overlaps the 4x6 photo ever so slightly so that it won't leave a gap between the photo and the frame. And you can glue those both in place and have a very clean edge. All right, I have inked my papers with that black ink, which I mentioned earlier, to get some of these gray weathered wood looks. And I'm gonna make these to fit 3x4 photos. And because they're smaller photos, we want the frames to be kind of proportionally smaller. I didn't do that much math to make it that complicated, but here I'm doing 3/4 inch strips instead of 1-inch strips. So when I measure my 3x4 lengths, I need to remember to add 3 inches plus 3/4 plus 3/4. And then I need to remember to kind of subtract that little bit of 1/4 of an inch to get the frame to overlap. Now, as I'm explaining this, I am doing this in bulk. I'm doing all of the cutting of all the pieces, then I line them up, and then I label all the corners, and then I start doing one frame at a time with the lining up and cutting and then gluing all the pieces into place. So that speeds up the process quite a bit. Now here you can see me working on scratch paper because I was getting glue everywhere. So use scratch paper for the gluing process as well as for the inking process, and that'll save you time and headache and cleanup. And as you can see here, those numbers come in very handy because when I've got multiple pieces lying around, it helps me get things right back in place. I did go ahead and ink almost all the edges before doing this, except for that edge that's going to get cut because you can't ink it because you're just going to cut it off. So I do that at the very last second before assembling these frames. All right, this kind of stepped back a little bit prior to me setting down that scratch piece of paper just because I wanted to clarify some of those steps. All right, in a couple of cases, I did add some liquid glue to things after they were assembled so that anything that was a little bit too loose would be sturdy. All right, and here are my frames in the end. Remember, you can make these in any sizes. Just remember that little bit of math trick we talked about. And that wraps up this part of the project. So if you want to join me for part 2, I will leave you a link so that you can head over there.